Across the world since the Blitzkrieg of the Second World War, tanks have been an integral part of any fighting force. Hello, and my name is Tom Alley, and across this short documentary I will be covering the history of Australian tanks, from the British Medium Mark II in 1939 up to the more modern German Leopard 1, and the tank that we will focus on, the M1A1 Abrams. Australia did actually design one of its own tanks from scratch though, the Australian cruiser tank Mark I Sentinel. It was based off both the M3 Stuart and the British cruiser tanks. Development started in November 1940 and was terminated in July of 1943. While the tank was never used in combat, it represents one of Australia's few endeavours into tank production. 3 Sentinels survived the disposal by the Australian government in 1945. These tanks are located at Bovington Tank Museum, the RAAC Tank Museum, and the Australian War Memorial. The title of best tank in the world is a hard one to fill, due to the fact that no one modern main battle tank is better in every way than any other modern MBT, but a definite competitor is the M1 and M1A1 Abrams. The development process was started by America in a partnership with West Germany in the early 1960s. The early days of the Cold War. The first prototype to come out of this project was the MBT-70. Unfortunately, the MBT-70 compared almost evenly with the M60A1 pattern, the tank the M1 was eventually to replace, with a much more complicated and expensive system. The next prototype to come out of the project was XM803, a tank that was a cross between the pattern and the MBT-70, but without any of the MBT-70's advantages, but still having quite a hefty price tag. This project was cancelled in November of 1971, and its funding moved over to the XM815 project. Renamed later on as the M1 Abrams after General Creighton Abrams, production prototypes were delivered in 1976 by Chrysler and General Motors. Chrysler won the design competition by redesigning the tank's turret and introducing a revolutionary gas turbine engine. This version of the tank was armed with the license-built version of the British 105mm Royal Ordnance L7 rifled tank gun. From this period until 1982, Chrysler built over 1,000 tanks before General Dynamics Land Systems purchased Chrysler Defence. The total number of M1 tanks produced in the period of 1979 to 1985 amounts to 3,273. The production plants are located in the government-owned GDLS-operated Lima Army Tank Plant in Lima, Ohio, and was later joined by the Detroit Arsenal Tank Plant in Warren, Michigan. Almost as soon as it was finished, plans were already underway for the upgrade of the M1 Abrams. These upgrades featured replacement of the 105mm Royal Ordnance L7 rifled gun with the M256 120mm smoothbore cannon, developed by the German defense company Rheinmetall AG for the Leopard 2. Chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear defense systems were added, allowing the tank to lock down and be able to survive for days on end in almost any situation. And finally adding the upgraded Chobham armor packages around the tank. 5,000 of these tanks were produced from 1986 to 1992, the total number of tanks in the M1 series now reaching approximately 9,000 units at an average cost of $4.3 million per unit, or a total of more than $36 billion. For many years, the M1 tanks had received criticism about their high cost and fuel consumption, relative to tanks of similar effectiveness and size. This wasn't helped by the fact that the tank had not seen conflict yet to prove itself. In fact, the only combat-like testing the M1 tanks and crews had gone through was the war games. which were a series of long combat situations for a potential conflict with the Russians that were conducted in different parts of Western Europe from 1980. Mostly in West Germany, but also including some other countries such as South Korea. However, as we now know, the Berlin Wall fell by January 1991, and the US Army moved its focus to the Middle East. The Gulf War was made up of two separate operations. The first one was Operation Desert Shield, going from the 2nd of August 1990 to the 17th of January 1991. This was the build-up of troops, supplies and vehicles in the Gulf, as well as their training for those conditions. The second part, Operation Desert Storm, went from the 17th of January 1991 to the 28th of February 1991. The war was waged between the coalition forces made up of 35 countries led by the United States against Iraq and its dictator Saddam Hussein for their invasion and annexation of Kuwait. The leading force in the coalition army were the M1 tanks. With their superior firepower, armor, mobility, and target acquisition, there was little the outdated Russian T-72s, T-62s, and T-55s could do against them, without night vision systems or range-finding technology of the time. Adding to this, most of the range conflict happened at night, where the Abrams night vision systems trumped the pot shots at muzzle flashes from the Iraqis. Out of the 1,848 M1s and M1A1s in the Gulf, only 23 were damaged. Out of that, 9 tanks were destroyed, 7 by friendly fire and the other 2 to prevent capture after damage. The other tanks only took minor damage that had little to no effect on its combat capabilities. Very few tanks were hit by enemy fire in the first place, and thus no fatalities occurred amongst the tank crews. The other contributing factor was the effective range of both tanks. While the M1A1 was capable of making kills at ranges exceeding 2,500 meters, the most powerful tanks of the Iraqis, the T-72s, had an effective range of less than 2,000 meters with its best ammunition. This made a massive difference in the open expanses of desert in the Gulf, where being able to identify and take out the T-72s before they could even shoot made all the difference. Following this amazing success, the Australian government decided to purchase 59 of the newer M1A1 AIM-SA tanks. They arrived on Thursday the 21st of September 2006 in Melbourne. The Australian government chose to purchase this tank because the deal with the US Army also gave them a number of M88A2 Hercules armoured recovery vehicles, logistics and training support, which was something at this stage the Australian government did not want to pass up. It also gives the Australian Army the ability to operate closely with its allies, especially the Americans in any combat situation. Whether in the Australian or American Army's hand, the M1A1 Abrams is a force to be reckoned with. While there are other tanks out there that are newer or more powerful than the Abrams, it is but part of a system, a combined fighting force, from men on the ground to the eye in the sky. Thanks for watching and goodbye.